The French spent $287 million and buried most of their workforce before a single ship crossed from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This is the story of the most expensive engineering failure in human history, and the brutal physics that finally conquered it. Ferdinand de Lesseps was 74 years old when he announced the Panama Canal project. He was a national hero. The Suez Canal had made him the most famous engineer on Earth. The man who connected Europe to Asia, cut the travel time to India in half, and proved that no geographic barrier was too great. When he stood before the Paris Geographical Society and promised a sea-level canal through the Isthmus of Panama, the room erupted. No locks, no complicated mechanisms, just a ditch between two oceans. The math was simple. Dig roughly 120 million cubic yards of earth across 50 miles of jungle. The cost estimate was $120 million. The jungle would cooperate, he assured them. It had no choice. The first shovel hit Panamanian soil in January 1882. The French focused on the most brutal section first, the Culebra Cut. This was a 9-mile gash through the Continental Divide, the mountainous spine of the Americas. The plan was to slice through rock, shale, and clay at an angle steep enough to hold itself up. But the geology of Panama had other ideas. The soil was saturated. The rainy season dropped 200 inches of water in a single year. Every time the workers carved a cubic yard out of the mountainside, rain and gravity would slide 2 cubic yards back in. The French dug 500,000 cubic yards a month. The jungle returned 600,000. It was a war of subtraction, and the jungle had more to give. The mudslides were visible. The real killer was invisible. In 1882, the medical community believed diseases like malaria and yellow fever were caused by bad air, miasma, rising from swamps and rotting vegetation. The French built hospitals with moats of water around the legs of every bed. The moats were designed to stop ants. They stopped the ants, but they also bred mosquitoes, the actual carriers of the deadly parasites. A single mosquito, laying eggs in a hospital moat, could kill more efficiently than any rock slide. The French doctors recorded fevers spiking to 106 degrees, black vomit, jaundice turning skin yellow as parchment. They called it by a name that said nothing about the cause, yellow fever, and they were powerless. By 1889, the Universal Interoceanic Canal Company, the Compagnie Universelle, was dead. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. $287 million spent, roughly $9 billion in today's money. 78 million cubic yards of earth excavated, enough to build a wall 10 feet high and 10 feet wide from New York to San Francisco. 22,000 French and Caribbean workers dead. The canal was less than 40% complete. Ferdinand de Lesseps, the hero of Suez, was ruined. His son Charles was convicted of fraud and sentenced to prison. The company's liquidation triggered the largest financial scandal in French history, the Panama Affair, dragging down senators, ministers, and half of the French government. The jungle did not just defeat an engineering project. It devoured an entire nation's pride. 15 years passed. The jungle reclaimed the French excavations. Steam shovels rusted in place. Hospitals collapsed into their own moats, and the Culebra Cut slowly filled with what the rain had always wanted to return. Then, in 1904, the United States arrived. Theodore Roosevelt had just helped Panama secede from Colombia, with American warships conveniently offshore, and the new nation signed over a 10-mile-wide strip of land in perpetuity. The Americans walked into the same jungle, the same mud, and the same mosquitoes that had destroyed the French. But they had something de Lesseps never did. They had a man who understood that mosquitoes, not mud, were the real enemy. His name was William Gorgas. Gorgas was not guessing. In 1900, a Cuban doctor named Carlos Finley had proposed that mosquitoes transmitted yellow fever. An American Army doctor named Walter Reed had proved it. using human volunteers who agreed to be bitten by infected insects. Some of them died. Their sacrifice gave Gorgas a weapon, certainty. He fumigated every building in Panama. He drained swamps, poured oil on standing water, and installed screens on every window. He sent crews house to house with ladders and spray tanks. His budget request for mosquito netting was rejected 3 times by Washington. They called it a waste of money. Gorgas spent it anyway. He understood something the bureaucrats did not. The cost of a mosquito net was measured in cents. The cost of a dead worker was measured in thousands of dollars, and in the momentum of an entire project. Within 18 months, yellow fever was eliminated from the canal zone entirely. Malaria cases dropped 90%. A disease that had killed thousands every year simply vanished. The invisible enemy had been seen, and it was burned from the map. With the Mosquitoes defeated, the Americans faced the same impossible geometry that had broken the French, moving a mountain to meet the sea. The French answer was a sea-level ditch. Dig deep enough that ocean water simply flows through. It was beautiful in theory. It was catastrophic in practice. The American answer was the opposite. They would not bring the ships down to the sea. They would lift the sea up to the ships. Their plan used 3 massive lock systems: Gatun on the Atlantic side, Pedro Miguel and Miraflores on the Pacific, to raise vessels 85 feet above sea level, step by step, chamber by chamber. A ship would climb over the continental divide, like climbing a staircase made of water. And here was the genius. By using locks, they did not need to dig the Culebra Cut 60 feet deep. 40 feet was enough. The water itself, millions of tons of it, would do the heavy lifting. Gravity would be the only engine. No pumps, no motors, just physics, executed on a scale never before attempted. To power the locks, the Americans needed water, massive, reliable quantities of it, delivered by gravity on demand. Their solution was the Gatun Dam, at the time the largest dam ever built. 105 feet tall, 7,500 feet across, nearly 1.5 miles of earthen embankment. Behind it formed Gatun Lake, 164 square miles, the largest artificial lake in the world. The dam captured the Chagres River, the same river whose violent floods had tormented the French for a decade. Now that river, once the canal's greatest enemy, would become its fuel. Every time a ship passes through the locks, 52 million gallons of fresh water rush by gravity from Gatun Lake into the chambers, lift the vessel, and then drain into the sea. The water is spent. It is never recovered. The lake's supply is renewed by the same tropical rains that once buried French workers alive. While the locks took shape, the Culebra Cut remained a living hell. The Americans brought steam shovels, enormous machines that could scoop 8 tons of earth in a single bite. These were not the hand tools of the French era. They were 95-ton Bucyrus steam shovels running on railroad tracks, their massive dipper arms swinging through the air like the necks of prehistoric animals. They laid a railroad network so dense that tracks ran on 5 different levels, with trains carrying spoil to dumps miles away 24 hours a day. They drilled into the walls of the cut and packed them with dynamite. The explosions were constant, 50,000 pounds of dynamite a month. Workers described the air as tasting of sulfur and sweat. But the rock slides never stopped. In one slide alone, 500,000 cubic yards collapsed in minutes, burying steam shovels and rail lines. 5,600 more men died in the American phase. Most were West Indian laborers, paid in silver, while skilled American workers received gold. 2 payrolls, kept in separate vaults, leading to 2 separate cemeteries on opposite sides of the same hill. The visible parts of the Panama Canal, the massive concrete walls, the towering steel gates, are impressive, but the real genius is underground. Each lock chamber is 110 feet wide and 1,000 feet long. When a ship enters, gates 7 feet thick and 65 tons, each close behind it like enormous jaws. There are no pumps. Instead, water from Gatun Lake flows by gravity through culverts, tunnels 18 feet in diameter, running inside the lock walls. It enters the chamber through 100 holes in the floor. The water rises so smoothly that a coin balanced on its edge will not tip over. In 8 minutes, the chamber fills or empties, lifting or lowering the ship by 28 feet. Repeat this 3 times and 6,000 miles of journey around Cape Horn becomes a single day. The physics is elegant. The execution cost nearly 28,000 lives. August 15, 1914. The steamship Ancon became the first vessel to officially transit the Panama Canal. It took 9 hours and 40 minutes, a route that had once required sailing 8,000 miles around Cape Horn. Through some of the most violent ocean water on the planet, a passage where countless ships and sailors were lost, now took less than a day. The world had been folded in half, but the timing was bitter. Europe had just plunged into the First World War. The Great Canal opened not to celebration, but to silence. The front page of every newspaper was already full of a different kind of engineering: trench warfare, machine guns, chemical gas. The canal, built at the cost of so many lives, arrived in a world that had learned to kill on an industrial scale. The irony was not lost on those who had survived. The final accounting is staggering. Between the French and American efforts, the Panama Canal cost roughly $662 million in direct expenditure, adjusted for inflation, somewhere north of $15 billion. 300 million cubic yards of earth were excavated, enough to build 63 Great Pyramids, or a wall from New York to San Francisco 30 feet high. And nearly 28,000 men were buried in the jungle, most in unmarked graves. The canal's completion rate per life works out to approximately 1 inch of Panama Canal for every man who died. These are the numbers. But the ledger does not balance in the way humans experience history. You cannot trade lives for trade routes. Or perhaps you can. And that is the horror that the Panama Canal asks us to sit with. The Panama Canal still operates today, more than a century later. The same locks, the same gravity-fed water, the same elegant physics. Over 14,000 ships pass through every year, roughly 40 a day, carrying everything from containerized cargo to liquefied natural gas. The toll for a single large vessel can exceed $1 million. In 2016, a third lane of even larger locks opened, designed for ships 3 times the width of the original chambers. The scale has expanded, but the principle is unchanged. Water, gravity, and the sacrifice of nearly 28,000 men, most of whose names are lost, beneath every hull that passes from one ocean to the other. The French dreamed it. The Americans built it. The jungle buried the rest. And the world still moves through their grave. The Panama Canal still operates today, more than a century later. The same locks, the same gravity-fed water, the same elegant physics. Over 14,000 ships pass through every year, roughly 40 a day, carrying everything from containerized cargo to liquefied natural gas. The toll for a single large vessel can exceed $1 million. In 2016, a third lane of even larger locks opened, designed for ships 3 times the width of the original chambers. The scale has expanded, but the principle is unchanged. Water, gravity, and the sacrifice of nearly 28,000 men, most of whose names are lost, beneath every hull that passes from one ocean to the other. The French dreamed it. The Americans built it. The jungle buried the rest. And the world still moves through their grave.